My name is Lily Qian. It's our pleasure to present our research work with the title China Drive for Food Sovereignty, Opportunities and Risks in the Sino-Dutch Agri-Food Collaboration. This work is done by Yujing Tam, myself, Anna Hoffman, Peter Swan, and Mingxing Yuan. The presentation contains the following content, which will be presented by myself and Peter. And just now, Forrest mentioned that because of the logistic problem, I will first present my part, and then Peter, when he arrives, he will mainly talk about the policy part. And at the end of the presentation, all the researchers are available here to answer the question in the question and answer sessions. First of all, why we would like to do this research? Because China and the Netherlands has a long history of collaboration in agri-food. But the interaction is very dynamic due to geopolitics and geoeconomics. Many countries, including China, consider the food security and the food sovereignty and self-resilience a very important issue, especially after the COVID pandemic. Therefore, we would like to carry out a research to answer those three main questions. First question, what are the focus points and ambitions of China on agri-food development, both domestically and globally? Second question, what are the demands and needs in China's horticulture and livestock sectors in light of those ambitions? And how and to what extent that Dutch actors can contribute to meet those needs. And the third question is, what are the challenges and risks? What are the challenges and risks perceived by the Chinese companies during Sino-Dutch agri-food collaboration? And what recommendations can we given to mitigate those risks in order to facilitate further collaboration? So the methods we use in our research is policy document and literature review, but also case study and interviews. And we focus on two sectors, horticulture and livestock. And we narrow down our scope into two very representative regions in China, the Western region and the East Delta region. So based on the policy information, we interviewed about 37 stakeholders related in agri-food in both China and the Netherlands in order to get insight of the sectorial and the regional landscape of agri-food project in China. This figure can clearly show how agri-food projects are managed in China. First of all, we have to distinguish between two different companies or stakeholders in China, the state-owned enterprises and the private enterprises. The state-owned enterprises are managed and financed by central or local governments. And there are also agri-food related associations which are also managed by government. For example, managed by the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs and the Ministry of Science and Technology, etc. So there are three types of different projects depending on who are the participants and the investors in this project. The first type of project we always know as the Agri High-Tech Zone project. Those projects is 100% state-led and financed. And those projects are with the aim for demonstration, so to showcase the most advanced agri-food technology. The second type of projects are invested by both the state-owned enterprise and the private enterprise. Normally, the state-owned enterprise acts as the main shareholder of the project, and the private enterprise has a less important role in terms of finance, but they take the responsibility of operation. Because this kind of project is mainly for scale up, so to invest a very large scale of production system, Therefore, the investment from the state-owned enterprise can overcome the capital constraint of the private company. And this kind of project is very well known as the EPCO project. So they have to start from engineering, purchasing, construction, and operation all together as a turnkey. The third type of project is private project. Obviously, it is fully invested by private enterprise. Those projects normally have a very mature commercial and business model, so it's very feasible. But this kind of private project can also try to get support from the government. For example, to get some loan from a policy bank. For example, the Agricultural Development Bank of China. And this kind of loan normally can cover about 70% of the total investment with the interest rate of only 3.5%. So it's very supportive to the private company to conduct agri-food project. So if we as Dutch actor involved in a Chinese agri-food project, we have to be clear in advance what type of project we are involved in. Okay, now we go to the sectorial insight. First, about horticulture. China has a fast increase of greenhouse area. For example, in 2023, there is 1,835 hectare newly built greenhouse in China. And the Netherlands is very well known as the world leader in horticulture. But we have to keep in mind that unlike the Netherlands' very uniform climate, China is big, so the climate is very diverse. So from the south to north. That means in many places in China, summer cooling and winter heating may require a lot of energy consumption. So according to many interviewees that we interviewed, in the previous time, China has largely focused on the hardware modernization, but not on knowledge and the skilled personnel, which leads to operational constraint. That means even though China imports advanced Dutch technology, Dutch greenhouse to China, but there is lack of people to use them. Therefore, the demand in horticulture sector in China instead of copy-paste the Dutch greenhouse technology to China, they prefer to have an integrated solution which can fit the Chinese condition better. Also, they need cultivation manager training to build their operational capacity. In addition, they instead of just importing equipment from abroad, they prefer to co-develop the equipment together with partners locally. And for the livestock sector, later Peter will mention the policy about the great food view, which means that the food demand is not only focused on the grain, but also to other products like vegetables and meat. So there's increased needs for animal proteins in China. For example, the meat consumption has grown almost 6 times more since 1987 in China, which means this livestock sector developed dramatically in China. But according to the interviewees, there are also constraints in this sector, for example, breeding, disease control, and feeding. In order to improve those factors, we need collaboration and data sharing. However, this sector in China is very closed-off sector, which means that there's limited data sharing and collaboration. For example, when the African swine fever happened, many companies in China become extremely isolated. So they closed the door for collaboration. In addition, there's overcapacity, especially for pig meat. So many companies are considering to shift from volume production to more efficiency and more differentiation. Therefore, in the livestock sector, the demands are, for example, breeding innovation, but of course that's required data sharing. And also, they need the training for farm management with very proper hygiene protocol. And also, they need some feeding technology, for example, to replace the imported soybean in pig feeding to buy available local food resources. And also, they would like to explore the possibility of collaboration that can increase the data sharing, be more open in this sector, and enable the big companies and SMEs to develop together in this sector. So with the insight of the two sectors, we have distinguished 5 main risks in agri-food project in China. The first risk is policy implementation gaps and contradictory objectives. And this kind of risk will create an unexpected operational environment, and this kind of risk is more severe in the western region compared to the eastern delta region, because in the western region, many projects are very subsidy driven. So that means they are more dependent on policy support and its stability. The second risk is geopolitics drives collaboration to more cautious. Just now, I mentioned that in the horticulture sector, the Chinese stakeholders need more integrated solution instead of just the buying and selling relationship. However, the geopolitics make many countries think the purely buying and selling relationship more safe. So that is contradict with the demand for the Chinese project, and especially when considering about IP and the technology protection. The third risk is ineffective local policy implementation, and that has something to do with also with the subsidy, etc. According to our interviewees, there are several projects in China that start very good in the beginning, but after the construction, the operation lasts not for long. That's because those projects are very subsidy driven, or those projects are operated by some real estate company. So when the subsidy stop, the project stop, or when the real estate company went bankrupt, then the project finished. And this picture also shows that in Shanghai, one very big real estate company in China invested in very large-scale greenhouse, but when the company went bankrupt, and then this is the tomato crop inside the greenhouse. The fourth risk is low operational capacity, and that's what I've already mentioned when I talk about the sector, that because previously China focused too much on the hardware instead of software or knowledge, so they are lacking of skilled personnel to operate the project. And the last risk is misaligned expectation, and that's when I mentioned about when I talk about the graph of how Chinese agri-food projects are managed. So we have to pay attention which kind of project, which type of project we are involved before we participate. So at the end of our report, we also provided some recommendations for Dutch government and Dutch companies. For Dutch government, we recommend to engage subnationally, which means to strengthen the province-to-province collaboration, taking into account the difference between the western and the eastern region of China. We also recommend the government to de-risk some collaboration, for example, to launch some risk toolkits in order to encourage the pilot collaboration with very clear IP and technology protect method and regulation. We also recommend the government to pay more attention to long-term collaboration and the project. For example, just now I mentioned some project when the subsidy stop, then the project stop. So try to encourage more long-term collaboration to ensure the continuity of the collaboration. And for Dutch companies, as I mentioned previously, we suggest them to shift from supplying products to supplying integrated solution, and also to localize its service by, for example, to set up a joint venture with Chinese partners. And also to navigate the local governance, and that's I've already mentioned in the project management slides. So to have a clear idea which type of project we are involved in, that helps us to set a more clear expectation. The last comment is that try to explore the collaboration not only with big companies, but also with some SMEs in China. And I have to emphasize that there's no single standard or recommendation that apply to every stakeholder in the Netherlands. So that's why we would like to leave this open during the question and answer session to discuss with all of you and to draw further conclusion and the recommendation. And now I give the floor to my colleague Peter.
I would start by setting more or less the scene in terms of the broader policy developments that take place in China, broader dynamics also in the sector itself, which in a way provide a kind of general position. So I'm not sure what has been discussed, but we'll see how things will work out. Yeah, I think what's very important to point out, and this is also what we stress in the chapters at the start of the report, is that food security, as we would say it in Europe, is really a Chefsache in China. So it's really important for the Chinese government that there is sufficient food. So food security is also very much framed in terms of food sufficiency. There should be sufficient production of food, and this very much relates to the national security of China. There have been cases, examples, events in the past where there have been food crisis, too little food, which also led to social unrest. So there's also this dimension when we talk about food security in the Chinese context. So originally, food security was very much focused on self-sufficiency, and particularly a focus on self-sufficiency in the production of grains, wheat, rice in particular. I think also in China the word for food security is grain security, so that also tells us a lot about the importance that is attributed to these specific products. So over time we see that this has been broadened. Originally the focus was very much on these grains, but we see that nowadays there is a broader focus on food security. Also different other food products are included in this definition. So we see that there's also a lot of attention for other products, food, vegetables. Also meat is an important part here, which in part has to do also with changes in the diet of Chinese citizens. And we also see that this in part is affected by concerns over food safety. So nowadays we see it's not only a concern about sufficient food, but this food should also be safe, of course. So very general, we see that a number of policy instruments are being used, have been developed. I think that these have also been discussed a bit more in detail for the two sectors that we focus on in the report. But in general, we see that in order to increase the self-sufficiency, subsidies play an important role. So there are subsidies to produce certain type of products. Next to subsidies, we also see that there's a kind of price support, price guarantees to make sure that food will be produced. We see that this importance that is attached to food security is not only a concern at the national level, but also at the regional and local level. So also policymakers there are held accountable for making sure that there is self-sufficient food. So that also plays an important role in the instruments that are being used. And I think what's also interesting to point out is that food reserves, food stocks also play an important role in Chinese policy related to food security. So we see that for a lot of products, actually food stocks are being held. In a way, this is related also to these subsidies and this price support. When this leads to overproduction, then of course it makes sense to store these products in a way that we also did in Europe for quite some time. But we also see that sometimes these food reserves are being filled with products that are being imported to China, but it's very unclear to what extent this is really happening. So these efforts have led to an increase in production, yet at the same time we see that, well, this still falls short in terms of the demand that there is for food. To a certain extent, this has to do with a shortage of land in China. Fertile land, productive land is scarce and even declining because of other developments, but also because of mismanagement of this land. So it's quite hard to increase this self-sufficiency. I should have brought this one. Okay. Okay, so quite some challenges to guarantee this self-sufficiency, and this is also for quite some time realized by the Chinese government, by Chinese policy makers. So it is realized that some import is needed. Self-sufficiency alone cannot well, guarantee this food security. So the Chinese government uses this term of opening up and going out to basically describe this approach. And on the one hand, we see that this consists of a kind of moderate import of certain type of products to also meet this demand for food. And we also see that there's a clear focus on a diversification of imports. So it's a very strategic and well thought out strategy that China is using here. This is also reflected in the way that Chinese companies operate also at the global market, international markets. We see that they are much more engaged there. We see that they also try to collaborate with other countries or work in other countries to produce food. In part driven by a concern to guarantee imports, but at the same time we see that many factors actually play a role there. So we see that Chinese companies also operate at the global market, move to other areas because they feel that there are business opportunities there. For example, we also see that not all products that are being produced there will be imported to China. We also see that a lot of these products are actually being sold on the local market. Nonetheless, this is still very much related to this kind of strategic interest of China to have this food security, because the reasoning behind this is also that this will lead to stability at the international markets. So that's an important reason behind this. So we see all kinds of projects, developments, but also in the context of the Belt and Road initiative. And next to that, what's also quite interesting is that we see that also the Chinese government is adopting a more international position. So it's also collaborating at an international level in different international fora, different international collaboration products to contribute to food security, also in other regions. Again, reasoning behind this is also that this will create a kind of stability in the internal market, which is very important. So what we see in China that they try to find a balance between, on the one hand, having these moderate imports, so they do not want to fully rely on the import of products from abroad. And in that respect, it's also very important for them to continue to focus on this kind of self-sufficiency, because they are well aware that importing too many products from abroad also brings a risk with it. And you can manage this risk in a certain way by also making sure that you produce enough products yourself. So we also see that quite some strategic choices are being made here. So for example, China chooses to not import wheat or rice, only to a very limited extent, but they are more willing to import maize or soy, for example. So we also see here quite strategic choices being made. So this is what I can say about the kind of global or internationally oriented policies. We also see that this comes with domestic policies that are being developed, again, quite broad, but here we see actually two types of strategies, you could say, being pursued. On the one hand, we see a clear focus on preserving national resources, making sure that these natural resources are better preserved, better managed. To a certain extent, they do so by trying to develop so-called high standard farmlands. So there's quite some investment support for farmlands that are being developed that will also, would you say that? Productive, efficient, they have high yields, that's what's the word that I was looking for. And we see that in relation to that, there's also a focus on supporting certain type of agricultural entrepreneurs, especially so-called dragonhead enterprises, very big agri-businesses, but also cooperatives between farmers are supported to make investments to develop this land. So that's one part of it. The other part, and this is, I guess, well discussed, is this focus on technological innovation. So it's well recognized that in order to increase the yields, it's important to make use of new technologies. On the one hand, it's also stressed that these technologies should be tailored to local conditions, so they really should fit the local circumstances. So this is a key concern here. And what we also see, and it's quite interesting, is that there is a clear effort to reduce dependency on foreign technology. We see that Chinese companies are still looking for investors from abroad to develop these technologies, but it's very important for them to really develop these policies also in China. I think that's what I wanted to add to the presentations. Apologies for being a bit late.